Good afternoon, thriving cities. My name is David Shuffler. I'm coming to you from the South Bronx in New York City, um, sharing a budding coalition called New York City Communities Activating Public Spaces, or as we do in the non-for-profit world, nice caps. The goal of the coalition is to activate underutilized spaces, underutilized public spaces. YMPJ has a long history of activating underutilized public spaces. Most notable, about 20 years ago, we started our efforts to clean and revitalize the Bronx River, an 8-mile stretch of a fresh body of water that was heavily polluted as a result of the industrial era and a lot of blight. We were able to get 32 cars pulled out the river, 3 tons of debris, making the water ecological destination where people want to be, and also created over 33 acres of waterfront park space as a result of community organizing. As a result of these efforts in the early 90s, we were able to use this momentum to look at even larger great infrastructure that was put in our communities by racist practices. Most notable, Robert Moses built the Cross Bronx Expressway, as well as a few other highways in our neighborhood. These pictures here reflect the decommissioning of a 1.25-mile highway, which we were able to turn into a green space. And at the bottom, what you'll see is actually a art installation where we took a floating garbage barge and repurposed it into an edible food forest, just to show the city what you can do with space. And you may ask why we do this, right? We do this to have deep impacts. The 3 pillars where we hope to have impacts is health, equity, and resiliency. One thing that we've seen in the Bronx, and we notice in low-income communities of color, is that the life expectancy compared to white counterparts is alarming. In the Bronx, life expectancy is about 62 years of age, and across the city, it's about 81 years of age. So that's a huge variant. So what we do is we're activating spaces so that we could correct the ailments of the past. Thank you for your time. I'm going to pass it to my colleague, Siddhartha Sanchez.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Siddhartha Sanchez. I work with David at YMPJ. I'm a first-generation New Yorker, born and raised in the city, who's dedicated most of my career to uplifting grassroots solutions in the South Bronx. I'm going to spend a couple minutes running through the feasibility of our model and why we think it's important. The policy and power building goals of our collective are feasible because of how they counter barriers to activating public space, barriers such as funding and red tape. And as David mentioned, we address health, equity, and resilience using three pillars, really community organizing, capacity building, and our policy and advocacy efforts. Beginning with community organizing, our work is really grounded in replicating around the city and beyond what is possible when communities activate underutilized public spaces. The success of our work on the foodway led us to launching a listening tour over the past year. We grew from a foodway collective to nice caps. This slide highlights 2 examples of very different types of activation campaigns led by our partners. Capping the Cross Bronx is about leveraging the potential of air rights. This macro community vision for capping a toxic highway addresses health, equity, and resilience imperatives in the South Bronx. And on the right, you have an underutilized school building, over 600,000 square feet of space that the Western Queens Community Land Trust is proposing to activate with multiple uses that address community needs. The site is close to public housing, and it's in one of the fastest gentrifying neighborhoods in the country, Long Island City, Queens. The second pillar of our work is about capacity building and is grounded in really building the skills and resourcing our coalition members. We firmly believe in the power of weaving community together for shared learning. And I've learned through our work with Thriving Cities just this past summer that our scope should expand to include national relationship building. The tools we aim to develop to support capacity building feature approaches that we've used over the past 25 years to activate underutilized spaces with little to no private funding by leveraging existing public resources, institutional partnerships, elected officials, infrastructure redevelopment, and even brownfield remediation efforts. Capacity building is also collective fundraising for us and to pursue funding otherwise out of reach of individual groups and support our organizing efforts. Lastly, collective fundraising and capacity building also resources the implementation of activations through programs such as the Justice 40 Accelerator, which is designed to build the capacity of BIPOC communities to access federal infrastructure funding. The third and last pillar of our model and key to our feasibility and success is leveraging research and data as a key tool to shift policy when targeting government stakeholders. We're currently collaborating with city agencies such as the Department of Health and Parks, and looking to work with Columbia's Earth Institute to develop a report on the impact of activations citywide. This report is funded by a state poverty reduction initiative and will make the case for communities to hold long-term operating agreements with public agencies and will recommend specific policy next steps. The honeycomb in this slide shows potential impacts of the report and includes ecosystem services, mental health benefits, and economic opportunities. In closing, we'd like to thank you, Thriving Cities, for considering this model and for giving us so much in the process. This image taken this past August represents much of our organizing, from the Parks Commissioner to the Bronx River Alliance, to YMPJ organizers and other community leaders. And in this case, our guest of honor, Umer Kaku, fellow Thriving Cities finalist from Festival Beach Food Forest in Austin, Texas. Our budding collaboration with Festival Beach is one example of the coalition and capacity building that is possible through organizing. Please stay tuned for our collaborative podcast coming this November. Buenas tardes y gracias por su atención.
Thank you so much, New York. Love to see all that community love in the chat as well. Evaluators, please jump on in.
Well, since I am a born and bred Brooklynite, I will just say I'm really excited to see you guys here. So just a quick question, just getting a little more specific on the application, which I found very exciting, partly because I am a New Yorker. But I would love to hear a little bit more about, the grant is really around scaling what we've done in the Bronx around the Foodways Initiative to the other boroughs. And so much of the grant looks like it's going towards that capacity, building that capacity for your team to, get the coordinators, get out the word and start building eventually. So can you just talk a little bit more about the work plan? Getting a little more specific.
I can start, David, jump in. The work has already started, as we mentioned in the presentation. This work began last year in the midst of COVID and was supported through a state poverty reduction initiative. The listening tour was the first step, really, of our collective impact approach, really aligning around a vision. That vision is really, the activation of underutilized public spaces by communities. Everything from residents and friends of groups to CBOs, and working with partners to make that happen. We kicked off our citywide coalition this past June, and in that process also tweaked our name to be more than just the Foodway Collective, as we mentioned, understanding that much of the work that's happening around the city doesn't necessarily touch food, but does impact health, equity, and resilience. And so now we're NICECAPs. Moving forward, we mentioned the report that's going to be coming out at the end of November. That's something we're working on actively with our partners, academic and government partners. And we're aiming to use this report to really leverage it as part of our campaign to build out our organizing citywide, and then also target specific policies that will be identified in the report as part of our campaign. We haven't decided what our collective action steps will be, because that's something we'll do together over the next few months. But we're definitely intend to use the report in that to that purpose. Whether it's conferences or rallies, definitely briefing elected officials, and working to identify and shift specific policy that addresses some of the barriers that we've identified.
So maybe I'll jump in. So thanks so much. I just want to say I love the video and I love the intersectionality of your work. And so maybe I have a question and maybe I missed this, but I'm just thinking about, to the notion of scaling this up in so many places, which is so awesome. And I love the name, Nice Caps. How long did it take for you all to actually get the Bronx Foodway to get going? Because I'm just trying to see in terms of your timeline and, do you think it's going to be easier to make these other things happen because of the proof points you already have? So what's kind of the timing and maybe some of the challenges that you anticipate, or the not so big challenges because you've already done this?
Yeah, I could try to answer that first and then see if Sid has anything to add to that. I think we learned a lot of lessons over the years on how to activate public spaces and have just increased our tools to be able to activate underutilized spaces. I think one of the lessons that we've learned with bringing people together is that you just find best practices and relationships, which actually has allowed for us to move projects a lot faster than we actually expected. The Bronx River itself was literally about a 10, 15-year campaign and still continues to be, something that we continue to work on to make it swimmable and navigable. But the real thing about, I think, transforming community is that there's a process, and we believe that this model is replicable and scalable, even in communities that don't have private funding. Like us, we didn't have any private funding. We accessed public resources during critical times to move our agenda forward. And so what we think is that, in different communities throughout the United States, it's all about, community organizing, having a groundswell of people prepared and knowledgeable about the issues. We think it's important to do capacity building, right? So folks know, who are the players. We think it's important to do site assessments to understand what's going on in the soil and what's going on in the land, but then also to seize critical opportunities in your community where, if there's redevelopment happening, or if there are city, state, or federal programs that you could tap into. So what we've seen was that some of our sites were brownfield sites, right, which are contaminated sites that need to be remediated. And we were able to tap into U.S. Environmental Protection Agency, US EPA dollars to actually get some of our sites remediated. And we've also, in another example, we've activated a space taking underutilized space using the city's public plaza program, which is a program that you connect with the city and you're able to bring out tables and chairs into underutilized spaces. So that, those are two examples of a federal program and a city program that we were able to use. And we think, in other communities, you have access to your federal government and you still also have access to your city departments as well too. I hope that answered your question.
Yeah.
Hey, thanks, Sadhu here. Great work, really inspiring to see what you all are doing. So thanks for sharing it with us and for doing what you're doing. I'm curious, I'm kind of riffing off of what Benita's question. It seems like the funding that you're proposing from Thriving Cities will really kind of build the capacity within your organization to scale up. And I'm curious, kind of how, as your organization is growing, what percentage of your organization's funding would be coming from the Thriving Cities program, and how would you envision being able to sustain that in the next couple of years so that it's not just a one thing and then you can't keep it going? So I guess I'm just curious to kind of see how this capacity building fits within what you're trying to do and growing your efforts kind of to more boroughs.
Sure, I'll try to tackle that question as well too. I think the beauty of the work that we're doing is that folks are doing this work already. We're actually just bringing we're just like a convener, more or less, right? Where we're bringing together different parts of the city with folks who are activating this work already, doing this kind of work already. So the budget in some ways allows for folks who are not necessarily being compensated for the work that they're doing already to be incentivized a little bit to continue the work that they do, to play a bit of a coordinating role to bring in their partners in a particular borough. New York City's, a pretty big place, and you could easily stay in a borough by it in itself. So we think it's important for there to be convenings, like smaller convenings borough-wide to deal with like local particular issues, and then also bring to people together on maybe on a quarterly basis. But what we know is that to move policy in New York City, you can't do it just by one borough. You really need to be reflective of all the corners of all the boroughs, and so this is an effort so to weave together communities of color. How we sustain this over the future, ideally, we're going to be doing collective fundraising together. We were just awarded this Justice 40 Accelerator, which is a funding cohort of funders nationally that are looking to leverage the Justice 40 initiative coming out of the Biden administration. So ideally, we're bringing these resources to our coalition so that we're collectively fundraising as we move forward.
And I would just like to add that one of the things that YMPJ has done very successfully is to leverage the institutions of government to support their work. We've had partners, for years helping. I'm Liam Cavanaugh from the New York City Parks Department. We've worked with partner organizations for years, but one of the unique things about this partnership is the value and importance they place on community capital, which is really has been critical to the success of the Foodway and other work in Concrete Pan Park. But we work with them around that. They've reached out to the Department of Transportation around the Plaza program and are leveraging that goal that the city has to activate these public spaces in a way by using the community-led initiatives to do that. Our city's health department, they've tapped into and working to deliver both research and programs that help meet those healthy community goals that they described earlier in the presentation. Yes, the long term, you're always worried about raising funds and sustaining yourselves, but they do have a model that is sustainable without having to be constantly raising money year after year after year.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. That was a wonderful presentation from the Youth Ministries for Peace and Justice team from the Bronx in New York City.